So we've seen how to use the controller as. Now let's take a look at one more example, and that's the scope fake controller as file. If we look at this one and let's take a run, we can see over here in the browser we've got shell title. We'll put 123, and in the bottom we'll put 999. Works just like the other ones work, but what's the difference here? Well, now we're not using the controller as. We're actually showing you here how controller as actually works. So on line 7 we can see the controller for customer, and on line 4 we see it for shell, but we're still using that vm.syntax. So if we scroll down a bit, we can see we've got scope.vm equals this, and then we've got scope.vm title, and then we can set that to shell title. So it's very similar to the other examples we saw, but what we're seeing here is that what really happens under the covers when we're using controller as is we don't lose scope. We're actually still having the scope, it's just syntactic sugar on top of it. So what does that mean? Well, here we've got the scope. This is the regular controller example, but we're faking out the controller as. Here we've got the scope where we're decorating it with VM and then saying, make the VM be this. Remember, shell is a constructor where this is now going to represent the shell itself. So we can set this onto scope VM, and then we can decorate it with properties. So now we've got scope.vm this, scope.vm title. We've got all these scope.vm dots that we could use. If we had about 20 properties, we'd have about 20 of these guys. So we go do, and put all our properties on here for the various things. Like maybe we've got name, or maybe we've got city, or whatever else we might have. And up top, we can just reference those as vm.title or vm.name or whatever we need. So let's take a look at this versus what we had in the previous example for controller as. Controller as kind of hides some of that for us. So up top, we can still have our VM dots or shell dots or whatever you want to call those. But at the bottom, we no longer see scope being injected. Notice what's missing here on line 27, no scope. Notice what's also missing inside of that function. There's no scope in there either. So now we can just say vm.title. We don't have to worry about doing what we did in the previous one here, where we said scope.vm.title or scope.vm.name right there in line 30. So this was just a little behind the scenes of how controller as actually works. Here we've got scope, where we're faking out controller as. We still inject scope on line 27, accept it on line 28, and then we use scope repeatedly inside of that shell constructor for the controller. And then here with controller as, we don't have to bother with the scope, and we don't have to worry about using it repeatedly. Do we still have it? Yeah, it's under the covers. Just syntactic sugar. And just a few reasons I like controller as syntax is because it helps us remove some of the clutter in our code, gets rid of the scope when we don't necessarily need to use anything other than the binding features for it, and we automatically get the dot help that we just saw earlier, and we don't lose any functionality that we had.